I feel like, you know, we all know the original source material in the original movie. And over the years, I always sort of like there's this discourse about trauma in regards to The Color Purple. But in this film, I think in a way it protects Black women, so to speak, because we can empathize with them without not seeing a lot of the things that were in the original movie or in the source material. Like you want to feel for these characters, but you don't have to like explicitly see a lot or hear a lot or feel a lot to know what they're going through. So why do you think this is important in this movie, in this iteration, especially now in 2023?
You know, I'm proud of Blitz for he's a visionary. This story is something that's very special to him as well, and I'm glad that he gave Celie an imagination, but he also gave us all an imagination. It shows who we are as Black people. We don't just sit and wallow in trauma. We come out some kind of way. And I feel like the younger generation needs to see that. They need to see that, baby, you will fall. That's gonna happen. Life be lifing, but you can get back up. And I think that he did an amazing job by allowing you guys to see a little bit of that trauma, but also so much joy. Yeah.
You know what just dawned on me? And Scott Sanders is really brilliant for this. This just hit me. We had to make Color Purple a musical because that's who we are. We're a musical people.
Yeah.
And so going and dealing with all of this trauma, we know trauma. You know, we have been taught how to function dysfunctionally since slavery. You know, we didn't have therapists. We had no one to talk to. So trauma has just been passed down generation after generation after generation, right? And so in order to break that curse, how we heal must look different.
Yeah.
You know, and so I just think it's just brilliant that this incredible book was turned into a musical because that's how we are. You know, if we can't find the words to say, we sing. We go to church. We dance and we move, and we always have a song in our heart, no matter what we went through. The slaves picking cotton, being whipped, they still singing in the fields picking cotton. You know, so we always have a resilience about us and how to turn that trauma into something so beautiful.
Well, thank you three so much for chatting with me, and I can't wait for more people to see this film. Colman, for you first, when I first saw your casting, like, I'm not used to seeing you as an antagonist because we all know Zola, but I had a friend who was like, oh, Colman's gonna be Mr. I don't want to not like Colman Domingo. I love Colman Domingo. I don't want to not like him if he's gonna be Mr. So I wanted to know, playing this specific antagonist in this film, already known for like one other prior portrayal, but with this portrayal being one that's a little bit more redemptive, so to speak, how was that experience like for you kind of playing that role within this film?
That was very conscious to understand how hurt people, right? I had to first find every single reason to love Mr. What do I love about him, and what do I find human? I'm sure he has dreams, needs, desires like anybody else. And what happens when you don't get that? What happens when you I think unconsciously make decisions to abuse others? He's trying to feel stronger and have more size in the world. Maybe he doesn't feel like he has agency in the world. For me, it's a lot of questions around his psyche and why do people do what they do. And then the arc of the film is everyone else starts to evolve, but he's sort of stuck in his own prison of toxic masculinity, of misogyny. Like he doesn't even have words for it. He doesn't even know how to have nuance of like being tender. So it's looking at the trope of a man of that time who has to, the world is changing around him, but he's so stuck in this idea of just, and I think it's a lot of things that go into that. I wasn't afraid of playing this character at all. I know that many people would feel like, oh, I don't know if I don't want to, it's not my job to be liked with roles. That's actually not my job. My job is to be in service to character and story and make them the most compelling, complex characters as I possibly can, and to make sure that I wrung out as much as possible so you see them as human beings and not just one idea. So I'm actually fascinated. I love that fact that people may come with that idea that they may hate me. That's very, for me, that's very black and white, and I live with all my characters in a very gray state, a very nuanced state, that I challenge people to rethink what they know, because also it makes it human and it puts them in in the seat of like, well, what do I think about myself?
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
That was a word.
This is why.
Hey, Corey, for you, I think that one phrase we use a lot in the Black community is breaking generational trauma, breaking generational curses and things like that. I think that Harpo in this film is very literally indicative of that because he wants to be his own person. What was it like kind of being in that space for this? And especially, even though we've talked about Mr., but I still think this father-son relationship is not one that we need to be wary of looking at on screen because it's important as well.
That's right.
So what would you have to say about that?
It's very important because I think it actually, it existed back then and it still exists now. It's a dynamic that I think is worth exploring. It's a dynamic that I think is worth getting more curious about and allowing ourselves the space and the time and the vulnerability to be able to break these things open. And that's the benefit of working with someone like Colman who I can ask these questions of, that we can literally start to peel back the layers and see what it is that makes Harpo tick. He's learning it because his character is so etched out, it's so nuanced that I'm seeing the possibility of love in that relationship.
Yeah.
I'm seeing what the absence of love means to Harpo in that relationship. I'm seeing how Sophia affects what Harpo sees as love. Even back then, it was radical. It's radical love. And Harpo leans into that. And so Harpo doesn't make much of a splash. He allows Sophia to do that because that's who she is and that's why he loves her. But it was all about getting behind his eyes and just, he's an observer and he's a quiet soul, but he's also forward moving. He's a businessman in a time where, Black men couldn't necessarily step out on their own. He found his own path, and I love that about him and I appreciate that about him, that he's able to get towards that language of how to love and that he sees the possibility in his father and he understands, but he also understands why his father is. And that's where he gets to. It's like, I understand why my father is the way he is. And it takes a lot of living in order to do that.
Well, thank you both so much for chatting with me, and I can't wait for more people to see this movie.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We all know the original, the source material in the original movie are classics, but there's always this discussion about trauma associated with those. And I think that this film, so to speak, I think it protects Black women in a way because it doesn't necessarily, we don't see a lot of things, and we kind of are put in places to empathize with these women while not having to see a lot of the brutality of it. And why do you think that is important to be able for this film to protect Black women, but also have this empathy for these characters during this specific time period?
Well, I think it's almost the way you said that, it's really beautiful. It's protecting Black women. In the film, in the original, there's a line, I believe, where Suge Avery looks at Celia and says, "Well, you sure is ugly." And that's not in this version. I think that was very purposeful because if we're living in Celia's imagination, why would then Celia imagine that another Black woman would say that to her? Because that's not her experience, right? Her experience with her sister, where Black women just love each other. And, I think this film is going to be so poignant and so moving because there's very clearly, I believe, something in the human condition that's still not learned about why we need to respect Black women. We are movers and shakers. We give so much to the earth. Like, no matter what, we're always going to stand up for people and be there for them. And I think this film is going to live as something that is a showcase of why we need to have that fueled back into us, why we need to protect each other and have other people protect us.
Yes. And it's so interesting because I feel like because you're playing the same character as Fantasia, like they're very much foils at different points in time of that same character. And it seems so spot on throughout most of the film. And I want to know, like, do you all take cues from each other? Like, how did that work as far as the working relationship with her and kind of developing this character to make sure it would be the same through line both in the first time period and the second time period?
Yeah, well, by design and just everyone's schedule, there wasn't really a lot of rehearsal time for me and Fantasia to sit together. So what we had to do was, find times when we could on set, maybe in between rehearsals or something, just to connect with each other and talk. And, you know, she's a master and I'm an actor, so my training is just to watch and observe. So I would just go to set and observe her. I would watch like little things like her hands, her hand tilts. I even had to try to get into the cadence of her voice. It's much higher than mine and there's a southern accent and a little to it. So I tried to get that as well. And, you know, I feel like at a certain point we didn't even recognize, but there was like a transition happening in our own lives. I've learned so much from her outside of this, and I think she's learned a lot from me, and it was really important to just put that all into the character.
Yes. And this film is going to be one where, you know, my mom's already talking about, like, I'm going to get my ticket on Christmas morning.
Come on, yes, let's go.
So you're going to have people who are already familiar with Everything in the Color Purple, as well as a new audience as well. What's the one thing that you hope that they take away from this movie, especially during the time of like, gratefulness and, you know, reminiscing on, you know, the year and being on a holiday? What's one thing you hope families take away from this?
Well, I think the holidays are like a calling to action to be the best version of yourself and be on your best behavior. And I hope people take away that the things that we bring into holiday season, which is more love, joy, we're more giving, is things we can be giving to each other 365 every day, single day of the year. And this film is a testament to what that looks like. We see it with Celie and Suge and Sophia especially, but even Celie just forgiving Mr. is something I feel that happens a lot at the holidays. And if we take the themes that are in this film and just seep them into our everyday lives, like, we can just move mountains together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and I can't wait for everyone to see this movie.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
In your eyes, what about this project is kind of like, for you, the next natural trajectory for you as a filmmaker?
Wow, I couldn't say I knew that was going to be the trajectory. You know, I mean, when I made The Burial of Kojo, I made it for $40,000 back in Ghana with very little help and resource. So, you know, you assume that you're going to do that, you know, okay, I might do a smaller indie, you know, for a little bit more money, and then I'm going to keep working my way up. This was like the quickest jump from, you know, spending $40,000 on a whole movie to spending $40,000 on craft service a day. You know, it was kind of that kind of insane jump. But I think for me, narratively, I've always explored the headspace. You know, that's been something that I've always done, and Burial of Kojo was that. It was the exploration of this character's headspace, dealing with guilt. You know, and so when I got this call, I was constantly asking myself, like, how can I find myself in this? So I went back to Alice Walker's book, first page, first line. She goes, "Dear God, I'm 14 years old," and I go, well, that's it. Anyone who writes letters to God must have an imagination. And that became my conduit. So I immediately knew, I was going to be doing what I'd done with The Burial of Kojo, but just on a bigger scale, the exploration of headspace. Because I really think that ultimately there's a big misconception that people who deal with abuse and trauma are waiting to be saved. They're docile, they're passive, which I found quite false. I think Celie teaches us that in this iteration, that she was constantly working on her liberation in her head, how to love, who to love, ways to forgive. All these things were things that she was working on, and she immediately became a very active character to me.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, one thing that I've noticed about this film is that it's very bright. It's very bright, and the costumes are very big. The production is very big. And why do you think that was important in contrast with the source material, which is it's rooted in a lot of real aspects about Black trauma?
Yes.
So why do you think it was important to have this film be so bright and colorful and loud in that aspect?
Well, because I think that ultimately when we often think about period in the past, we're processing it through photos that have survived, right? Most of which are sepia tone, desaturated, or black and white. So a lot of us, that's kind of the way when we think of the past, that's what the past must have felt like. In fact, that's false. You know, people lived in color. So our job was to push into that world. Also, the period in which we're capturing is such an innovative period. Those 40 years of the American life was the amounts of innovative elements that were happening were so fast. Electricity, radio. I mean, these things were all movies. These were all inventions in that window. And so for me, it was about what did it feel like when we first got the iPhone? You know, everything changes for you. It's the same way that what happens when Celie can wind a gramophone and hear music. I mean, everything is vivid and it's in living color. So my job with Dan Lawson was really to lean into that kind of novelty of what it'll be like if you were there. Yeah. You know, if you were in a juke joint or a club today, it's vivid, it's alive. That's how it felt to them. Right, and my job was to stay away from the drab and period look that often people are used to. Push into the photograph. Listen, there were no ACs. People sweat. Their skin reflected color. Of course, you're going to see these rich tones, right? And so that was my focal point, and I think that it also created proximity with audiences today because they could relate to the vivid nature of these shots in the same way that their life is today.
Yes. Well, amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And congrats in advance on the launch of this film.